welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today I'm really excited for this project. We have something a little bit simple and more toned down for me, or so I maybe say. So a lot of times on this channel I show you a lot of kind of fairly complicated makes that take a lot of time and effort, and I know that we don't all have this to do make. I also tend to use expensive fabrics and things like that, so this project, my goal is to stay under the $50 mark, if not even lower than that. And I just want to show you something simple that you can make and that only takes a few hours. And by a few, I mean hopefully 5 or less. I haven't made this pattern in a minute, but last time I made it, I'm pretty sure it was fairly cheap to make, but we'll confirm. So this is the pattern I'm making. I am making the jumper you see in picture A. This also has like a skirt version, which I would personally not make. So I have made this jumper before off camera. It is one of my absolute favorite pieces in my collection. So I decided to whip out this pattern again and make it again. I do usually have to widen the hips quite a bit on this. Let me check how many inches do I have to get it by. Not too bad. I only have to get it up 4 inches, which may sound like a lot, but it fits my butt and it looks really, really cute and really, really great. And it's so simple to make. And like I said, I just don't show a ton of things that are really easy to make on this channel. So I wanted to switch it up, do something a little different for this video and show you how to make something really simple. And for the fabric on this guy, we are using, oh, it has its little tag on it, giving me, you know, the yardage and all that stuff. I'm using this black snowflake corduroy from the CTA sale I went to a few months ago. I mean, in real time, I went to it last week, but you're gonna see this towards the end of the year. I decided to just use this because it cost me $6.25 for this whole thing. My plan to start is just to make the jumper. If I'm feeling a little bit more intense and up for it, I might also whip out a skirt of this material, but we'll see how wild I get this weekend. I know my weekends are truly wild. That the wildest I get on a weekend is whipping out a pair of overalls and a skirt. But yeah, I think this material is really cute, and if you didn't see that video, what's really fun about this material is I had this exact pattern in mind when I bought this material. Right now I don't allow myself to buy fabric unless I know exactly what I'm using it for. And with that little jumpsuit in mind, I was waiting in line and this woman behind me says, "Oh my gosh, that's fabric that I donated." And she proceeds to tell me that she used this fabric to make her daughter back when her daughter was 6 years old, which was, I think she said 35 years ago. So also she's vintage, but she used it to make her daughter a little jumper that looked just like this. And I just think that's so cute. I'm not gonna lie, I do take quite a bit of inspiration from kids' clothes, especially when I'm looking at overalls and stuff. I think it's such a bummer as adults that sometimes we only have boring options. I want to make something a little bit less boring, even though I know it's still black and snowflake and rather demure for my personal, I guess, wearing. If you are around this channel, you know I like a lot of color and a lot of bling, but I think it's fun to make something a little bit more simple that still kind of reminds me of the joy of my 90s childhood. But with that, I think we'll just jump into cutting and we'll see where this project takes us. Alrighty, to kick this off, I am cutting out the fabric. So for corduroy, it is incredibly important that you cut everything in the same direction. Corduroy, like velvet, has a nap, and I didn't know what that meant, and I ignored that when I first ever worked with corduroy. And what that means is it's a very slight difference, but there's a pile, which is like all the like weird tiny little fibers that poke up from both corduroy and velvet. And depending on which way it is up or down, your eye perceives a different reflection of light, which makes it look like a slightly different color, which again, you don't notice until you sew something without considering the nap, and then it becomes crystal clear what the nap means. I'm cutting these all in one direction, so it looks like I'm not using my fabric efficiently, but trust me, I'm doing the best I can. Also for this pattern, I don't need to make very much of an alteration, but I have just decided I overall like, especially my winter clothes, to be a little bit wider, so I am adding an additional 1/2 inch to each seam allowance on the side seam, so that'll give me a grand total of 2 more inches, which is also probably helpful for my hips because 1960s patterns are not usually designed for people with larger hips. And here is a reminder that I do have both a Patreon and a Ko-Fi where you can go over and become a monthly member and help support my channel. You get access to videos on Mondays instead of Fridays. If you want to support me over there, the links are in the description. I also did realize I wanted a pocket on the front, so I quickly just kind of made up and drafted my own pattern, which I then cut too short because I forgot to put on seam allowance. So I'm adding a seam allowance with my magnets that will just kind of work as a guide. And to start us off into the sewing, I am pinning the bib all the way way down through the front crotch seam. This is one long seam, which is, in my opinion, the downfall of this overall pattern. I love this pattern for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I don't enjoy this pattern as much is because if you are using a pattern that is not as subtle as the snowflake pattern, it splits it right down the middle and you have to be really careful with your pattern matching. So that is its unfortunate fatal flaw, but that aside, I still do deeply love this pattern. I also closed up the back crotch seam, making sure to leave basting stitches at the end so that way I have a easy way to put in the zipper. And with the front seam sewn together, I can put on the pocket. So first what I'm doing is doing kind of like a double turn hem on the top of the pocket, so that way we have a finished edge. I did also do a basting stitch around the edge of the pocket where I wanted the like folds to be, and then I clipped into the corners and stuff so that way I could get a really flat pocket fold that with like those nice round corners. If you aren't willing to clip your corners, you aren't going to get them to be as nice and round. And then once that is pressed, I am just eyeballing where I want it on the front of the bib. This is not the most technical way to do this, but it's the way I chose to. I did check at least with a ruler to make sure it was a straight pocket, so you know, I wasn't completely chaotic. From there, I'm top stitching around the pocket. First, I went around right on the edge, and then I'm going around at a 1/2 inch from the edge, just so that way we can start putting in that like consistent language of a doubled up top stitch, which you often see in overalls. Now I'm going to get ready to pop in my zipper, so I am picking out the seam that I made and pressed open for the zipper. And I have no black zippers in my stash at this length, so I just did my best and used a dark brown one, and I'm just going to go down and around that zipper, making it a just like one-sided placket. I don't really like zippers that are fully in the middle. I like to have one side be really close to the zipper and the other side be a placket that covers the zipper, but that's just my preference. There are a million ways to do a zipper. And with the fronts and the backs done, I can now start to sew them together. So first I am matching them at the inseam, and while sewing down the inseam I did get a couple weird little pleats, so I'm unpicking around those areas and easing that fabric more evenly so I visually don't have a little pleat there. This is just something I've learned that I like to fix because it usually does bother me in the final product. You don't have to fix these if you don't want to, but I do think it makes a big difference in making your garment look a little nicer at the end. And my seam finishing for this project actually is pinking. So the reason I chose pinking is when I've made overalls in the past out of corduroy and done a flat felled seam, it is almost a little bit too raised and I can actually get really bad chub rub from it. So I am trying out this type of seam to see if I can avoid that in the future. And then I did complete sewing up the side seams on each of these, and I'm just again pinking them. For pressing pant legs, these ones weren't actually that challenging, but sometimes they can be a little bit challenging. So what I'm doing here is I have my sleeve half roll thing sitting in here, and then I'm just ironing the seams. I just need something in there that is as long as possible so I don't have to move it around a ton, and something thinner like this is a little easier within a pant leg as opposed to a ham, even though again these are plenty wide-legged and you could absolutely use a ham. At this point I'm now going to add on the straps, and by that I just mean like the outer straps. These straps are actually really interesting. Most overalls, the straps are attached securely in the back and then you use the button in the front. These ones are secured in the front and the buttons in the back. I then assembled the lining, which was the like shortened bib, and then the back facings, and then the straps as well. So that was pretty easy and didn't take very long. And once that was sewn up, I did fold over the bottom of the bib lining by a 1/4 inch and just sewed that down so that way I would have a nice clean edge to eventually finish the garment. Now I can assemble the facing to the actual garment. So I'm just going around and matching all the different seams and corners and things like that between the facing and then just the outside of the overalls. With that sewn, I now have a ton of corners to clip, curves to clip, just a lot of things to prepare to turn this right side out without like it having any weird bumps or lumps around the edges. And for the straps, I will use a little bit of a turning tool just to poke out those corners at the very end. And then I'm just carefully ironing around the edges, making sure that any visibility of the seams is happening on the facing side and not on the front side. And once it is all turned inside out and pressed to my satisfaction, I am top stitching first right at the very front of the edge, and then I will go around again at that 1/2 inch top stitching line. This just gives these a like more overall or like denim look, I guess, because denim is something that you top stitch a lot like this. And then after choosing my buttons, I am going to add in the buttonholes. So the buttonholes on these are interesting because you actually put them into the butt of the overalls. So the idea is the straps are long enough that you don't get any like weird underwear through the buttonhole look. I always think this is constructed really interestingly, but I did find with the other pair of these that I made that it does work, so I stuck with it. And I actually feel a little bit more secure when I have the button on the strap as opposed to the button on the bottom of the overall. And then I tried these on again. So my fatal flaw of the last pair of these I made is I shortened them far too much. So I'm going more conservative in this case, and I'm just taking off this 1/2 inch. I will note I did also take 2 inches out of the pattern itself. But once I'm trying these on, I'm just giving myself like a tiny haircut, knowing that I'm going to double turn this hem. And what you see me using is I cut off the hem of the other pant leg, and then I'm using that as my marker for the pant leg that I'm now cutting. This will help keep them even in their like hem. And then for this double turn hem, I'm first just stitching around the bottom right at the edge. And it's especially important with corduroy that you then trim out any extra fabric you might have lying around in that seam. Corduroy is such a bulky fabric. And then I'm folding them over again and sewing that down. And with that, I'm pretty close to done. I'm just doing the final hand sewing details, such as sewing parts of the facing to the seam allowance in the sides. This just helps keep the facings down without having any stitching poking through to the other side. And the last thing I do will be sewing on the buttons. And with that, these are ready for the reveal. Alrighty, you've seen the reveal for this one. I think they're so cute and, as always, very comfy. I love a pair of overalls. But before we go into my final thoughts on this project, I'm going to jump into the cost breakdown first, and we have an impressively cheap cost breakdown here. I'm very excited. Alrighty, so for these overalls, I spent $3.25 on the fabric because I bought it by the pound, which it was $2 a pound. Really, really cheap. Love it. And then for the notions, which this includes thread, buttons, like any hooks and eyes. I'm trying to think what else is on here. Zippers, my label, which is not technically required to make something, but I like having a label. And all of those things cost me $4.46. The way I get my buttons so cheap is often I buy big lots off of like eBay, or I buy them at the thrift store. Basically all of my buttons are secondhand. That's one way that I do that. And then the zippers that I buy, I also buy in bulk off Etsy. So all of those different things can result in a lot cheaper materials. And then the pattern itself, since this is the second time I used the pattern, I divided the $8.82 this pattern cost me by 2 because I have used it twice. So I spent $4.41 on this pattern. So yeah, super, super cheap. This brings me to a supply total of $12.12. I was looking around on fast fashion sites and it was pretty hard, even at ultra fast fashion prices, to find a piece like this in this price, like that was this good of a deal. So you can beat fast fashion prices when you sew. However, you do have to buy things secondhand, especially at the thrift shop, right? If I bought all of this material brand new, we would not be talking in this budget, but since I got every single thing except for the label secondhand, it was pretty affordable. As for the labor hours, honestly, this was also affordable in the labor. This took me 1 hour to cut out, 3 hours to sew, and only 15 minutes of hand sewing. So pretty good deal. So this brings me to a hours spent on this of 4 hours and 15 minutes. Overalls are really fast to make because there's not that many seams, and this pair of overalls is particularly easy to make because of the fact that some overalls, when you make the bib is kind of more complex, but this one you go all the way up the middle. So it ends up being a lot easier than, like I said, some of the other bibs on overalls. So I think that's why this went so quickly. It's also still kind of wild, but I have made these before and they are a really, really fast make. And obviously with this being the second time I made them, it went even faster. On this channel, we talk about a living wage. These giant fast fashion companies are making billions and billions of dollars, which means they can afford to pay a living wage. However, they will probably not choose Seattle for that because Seattle would be a really expensive living wage, but I live in Seattle, so we go with that living wage. So a living wage in Seattle is $35.39 an hour. So we're going to multiply that by the 4 hours and 15 minutes I spent on this garment. So my labor cost would be $150.41. So this brings us to a full cost of $162.53. When you think about like how much slow fashion costs, this is not crazy for an ethical living wage. I guess I haven't paid that ever for overalls because I can make overalls so easily, but $162 is not like completely crazy for a pair of overalls, especially if it's a pair of overalls you're gonna wear and use for a good portion of your life. But I did do my research and I did dig into ultra fast fashion, mid-tier fast fashion, and then slow fashion, and what overalls that are similar than this cost. So for your ultra fast fashion, I found similar overalls that were $20, and I cannot say that would be any way, shape, or form that they could pay workers an ethical wage, even though they're on factory, and even though like what I do is not actually comparable to a factory setting. You still definitely cannot pay an ethical or living wage at $20, no matter where you are in the world, for each garment, because they say something like 1 to 3% of that actually goes back to the worker. So that would be 20 cents per overalls going to everybody who produced the fabric, produced all the like closures and things like that, sewed the whole thing together, cutting the thing. Even though there are machines that can cut fabric, people have to still guide them and pay attention, as well as like your delivery workers and your warehouse workers. So that would be only 20% per item going to those people, and that is definitely not enough to pay a living wage in any country. And then for the mid-fast fashion, so these are brands that are still fast fashion but are a little bit more pricey. These would be brands like, like ModCloth or Anthropology or Urban Outfitters, or kind of brands along that line where we're getting into that mid-tier, but they're still usually using unethical labor. These ones at least are cotton. The ultra fast fashion were poly, as in polyester, not poly as in polycule. But yeah, so these mid-fashion are cotton and they're $69, and I would again also like to note $20 and $69, both of those are more expensive than what I paid and what I spent to make these myself. And then for slow fashion, I went and I looked at Offens, which is a brand of overalls I've bought recently that I thought were really high quality, really great, and they actually pay their workers a living wage. What an idea. And it looked like a similar pair of overalls from them cost about $120, and this would be an organic cotton. The cotton that I'm using is from the 80s, I think is what I calculated back. So they're definitely not organic cotton. I didn't even burn test this, so I can't even factually tell you if they're cotton or not. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with these. $12 beat the cost of every single one of these brands. So like I said, we're doing well here. So for the pair of overalls itself, here we are. They're really cute. They're super comfortable, so I wore these to work today. I have zero complaints on how wearing them to work went, except for the fact that in the morning I like popped a squat to real quick put on some makeup because I like to get ready on the floor like I did when I was a teenager. I've tried to switch to vanity so many times, but I just prefer sitting on the floor to get ready. So I popped a squat to sit on the floor to get ready, and these split straight up the back right off the bat. I don't totally know how that happened. There probably was like a weakness in the thread, or there's like always a chance in all the like finishing and stuff that I snipped something. But yeah, these ripped right up the back. Luckily I had enough time this morning that I just popped back on my sewing machine, re-sewed the seam, and then sewed another seam like right behind that seam, so I would have a little bit more reinforcement there. So we should be good to go in that department. But I did want to note something went wrong because I have not ever had a pair of trousers split like that, and I don't feel like I mean, of course, like it meant they were sort of tight because they has to be tight enough to put that pressure, but I don't know. I think something else must have happened there for these to split up the back so easily. But otherwise, no complaints. I will say these are always not necessarily my favorite overalls to wear in public restrooms because they zip down the back. So even the ones with like the side zipper, the side buttons, I just feel like I can keep it all together better than this one, which I have to like really like take off from the front and like hold, and it's just a little bit more complex. Other than that, as far as sewing mistake, it's not that I didn't make any sewing mistakes, but I can't think of any sewing mistakes that I remember. I've made this pattern before, so I don't know, and it's honestly one of the most simple patterns. I do think overalls is a great thing to kind of start sewing early in your sewing journey because they're usually pretty fast and pretty simple. If you're doing a baggy or pair like this, they aren't super fitted, so you can usually figure out how to get fit to work for you as well. So I do think that overalls are a good beginner sewing project, but I'm also an insane person whose first sewing project was a shirtwaist dress. So take my advice with a grain of salt. But with that, I think we'll wrap up this project. I hope you enjoyed seeing this be sewn on a budget. As always, you can support my channel by commenting down below and giving this a thumbs up. And if you are new here, definitely subscribe and stick around. I have really great fun sewing projects coming up all the time. And if you have the financial ability to go above and beyond, and also desire, obviously, you can support my channel on both Ko-Fi or Patreon. I have both. Ko-Fi's a little cheaper because I take less fees. And what comes with that subscription, that monthly subscription, is you get access to every videos. I also have the one-off donation ability in Ko-Fi too. With that, I will see you next week at Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Bye!